6 months ago, I left Singapore, a place of safety, a place of structure and efficiency, to return to Afghanistan. And it wasn't a sudden decision, to leave my university job. It felt more like a calling. You see, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, between 2012 and 2013, I was here in Kabul managing an NGO project. And that's when I met Fauzia. She was a young woman in her final semester at Kabul University, working with us at the NGO as a radio drama producer. And one day she asked me if she could leave early for class. And as a project manager, I said, of course. But I went to refer to my boss, and immediately my boss said, if she walks out, she doesn't have to come back. I said nothing. As an educator, I thought I had failed her. And we were running a project on women's empowerment. Yet I couldn't empower the woman on my team. And that moment haunted me for years. So when a friend suggested I start my own NGO last year, I said yes immediately. I knew I wanted to do something in the teacher training space. And maybe it was guilt calling me back. I'm not sure. But especially now, education has stopped for girls after primary school, and I felt the need to help other Fauzias, the Fauzia I couldn't help before. So I quit my job, packed my things, shipped some of my books, and moved to Kabul. And today I work in a private university, helping with research training, English, academic policies, frameworks. Basically planting seeds of education wherever I can. But I realized that I wasn't just rebuilding systems. I was rebuilding myself, aligning the outer actions with my inner purpose. And that's what the IDG calls being, finding your inner compass, your integrity, your presence. And people sometimes ask, who are you to work in Afghanistan? What gives you the right? And it's a fair and valid question. So when I began my PhD at the University of Manchester in 2011, I wanted to understand how the arts could humanize suffering. And at that time, Afghanistan had the most refugees in the world. So my research led me there. And since then, I've run theatre workshops, managed women's radio projects, and presented Afghan research at international conferences. And have had my findings also published in scholarly publications. But I've also seen how researchers can exploit countries, collecting stories, publishing papers, and disappearing once the data collection ends. And I didn't want to be that kind of academic. So this time, I came not to study Afghans, but to build with them. Not to extract, but to invest. Not to help, but to co-create. I think that's what I've been trained to do in terms of decolonial thinking. To keep asking, what can the local system teach me? Without comparing it to Singapore's standards or the Eurocentric standards in the West. What can I learn from the Afghan people? So once I found my ethical footing, I had to rethink structure. Because at first I imagined KITE, Kabul Institute for Teacher Education, as an NGO, as a non-profit organization. But Afghanistan doesn't need more aid dependency. Education is not a project. It shouldn't be dependent on foreign aid, nor serve a donor's agenda. So I shifted to a social enterprise model, offering short training courses to fund free teacher training, or at least a heavily subsidized one. Social enterprise is not a familiar idea here, but I believe it's a sustainable one. A famous Singaporean social entrepreneur just told me a few days ago, forget about education. Start with profits. A certificate means nothing if the people here need jobs. And so when you create jobs, they have money to put food on the table, and they can decide what to do with the money. They can go for education, they can build a house, and that's when you can create change. That comment completely overturned my thinking and made me reevaluate my purpose. I could start a fruit juicing company, or even export dried fruits and nuts and even saffron. But I didn't leave Singapore for that. I believe education is the economy. Because if we build people, the people will build their nation. That's not idealism, that's systems thinking. Because if the mind changes, everything can change. And that's what I learned from Lee Kuan Yew, the Singapore model. So KITE remains. Teacher training continues to be the foundation of what I know to be true for Afghanistan. Just about 2 months ago, I posted a photo of a graduation ceremony at our university, and an Afghan woman living abroad commented, "Why didn't you mention the absence of women?" And she was right to ask. And her question made me pause to think about the politics of visibility and silence. And so I replied that visibility doesn't always mean empowerment. Sometimes invisibility protects what visibility might endanger. And in my PhD, I call this permissive invisibility. It's the idea that being unseen can sometimes be ethical, protective, and even necessary. I told her I'm not allowed into women's spaces. And I cannot comment on what I don't see or experience. I'm not endorsing the regime, but she said my silence can normalize injustice, even gender apartheid. Strong words. And they shook me. She spoke from afar. I spoke from within the country. She's Afghan, I'm Singaporean. I think both perspectives were valid. And that's the tension we hold as facilitators, weighing what feels right from the outside while honoring what feels possible from the inside. You see, I think education isn't about winning arguments. It's about staying open to contradictions, paradox, nuance, and questions that have no easy answers. I remember rejecting my close friend who was meant to be my co-founder in helping me to register and get a license from the ministry, because he wanted to import textbooks, import British and American English curricula. And I said, no, I would write my own. In fact, my name is already on an MOE commissioned textbook. I want to write materials that carry local voices, local flavor. Afghanistan doesn't need another franchise. It needs relevance, not a book that talks about taking the metro or the subway or buying coffee from a coffee stand when they don't even exist here. To establish a Singapore level quality in education. I also approached several institutions back home and was turned down. So when partnerships fall through, I remind myself that collaboration will need to take new forms. And from the IDG pillar, collaboration seems to be the weakest link at the moment. Nonetheless, we have now a 5-story building for Kite, even if we haven't moved in yet. I believe what we need are Afghans investing in their own people, people believing in their own capacity to make change. When an earthquake struck recently, I was having dinner and the table started shaking. So I ran downstairs and my neighbors had all gathered downstairs, and my neighbors asked, "Why don't you just go home to Singapore?" I shrugged. And then the internet was cut for about 2 to 3 days. And the same neighbor said, "Why are you still here in my shit country?" I smiled and said, "I'm with you in the same shit." We laughed. And for a moment, the heaviness lifted. I'm learning that empathy is being close to people, is proximity. Because when danger comes, I don't flee, though I could. And because I could, but I don't, I gain trust. Hope, therefore, isn't emotion. I think it's behavior. And whenever I share my vision, I tell Afghans about Dr. Tetsu Nakamura, the Japanese doctor who has spent decades here. He realized medicine alone couldn't heal the people. The real sickness was water scarcity and polluted water. So he built canals and turning deserts into farmland. He said, "One irrigation canal will do more good than 100 doctors." And that's what I want Kite to be. A canal of hope through education. Nakamura was my role model, a doctor to become an engineer. And maybe I too am changing in my identity from educator to entrepreneur, from teacher to builder. Because if we, the educated, lose hope, hopelessness multiplies for those who have none. The funny thing about action and alignment is this. Once you act on one small conviction, life somehow rearranges itself around it. Doors open, the right people appear. So, what is sustainability really? It's not just about renewable energy. Right now, I'm using solar energy, solar panels to light up my apartment. Sustainability is also not just about donation cycles. I think it's the ability to keep going with integrity, to sustain both the system and the self, to stay soft when the world gets hard, and to keep faith when progress feels slow. For me, moving from NGO work to a social enterprise model wasn't just a business decision. It was, I think, a spiritual practice, an attempt to align my personal ethics with economics and maybe compassion with competence. True sustainability isn't about staying the same, it's about staying true to your values, to your people, and to your purpose. Afghanistan so far has taught me that resilience isn't toughness, it's tenderness that keeps trying, and that inner growth for outer change isn't a slogan, it's a survival. It's survival. Everyone here is looking for a way out, but I think the way out is the way in. And for all of us who are watching this as facilitators, I don't think you need to move countries to practice IDG. You only need to listen deeply to the quiet revolution that is already happening inside you.